Daniele Bolelli, thank you for coming back on my podcast.
Of course.
um, One of the reasons I wanted to have you back was because, and this is, I have to say, I was so nervous to have you on because I've been listening to you for years, and then I had you on, and then I got really nervous, and then I realized I don't know how to use Twitter, and oh my gosh. Anyways, I felt like such an awkward nerd. I'm like, oh man, I blew it in front of one of the cool kids. I got to have this guy come back on here. So
I never noticed that you blew it if you did.
oh,
You did.
is that so funny how we're always our own worst critic? Like, but I mean, it comes with time. Like I've definitely, been doing a lot more podcasting. So you just get more comfortable with it. And yeah, so thank you for coming back. So before we get into some of your really cool and interesting background, which involves like your great grandfather and your grandmother and some of your very interesting badass history. For those of you who might not know who you are you able to just give a brief background?
Sure. I do a few things. I teach college. I teach history in college. I host a couple of podcasts. The one that's history-based is called History on Fire. The other one is called The Drunken Taoist. I've written a few books. I would like to write a few more. I think that's about
it. Very humble. Yeah. Okay, cool. So what I wanted to get into, so one of the things that you've actually written about and the way it's impacted your life is martial arts, which I think would be a really great segue into some of the other history in your family. So where did your where did your interest in martial arts come from?
I think like everybody else, sort of grew up watching Bruce Lee movies and things like that. So that's exciting, that's interesting. And ultimately, it's the classic thing that attracts pretty much everybody. Is this promise of empowerment, this promise of, which is kind of what all martial art flicks do, trying to give you this sort of this dream of empowerment in a way. And it also worked for me in the sense that being very, I would say, somewhat nerdy, reading a lot, like spending a lot of time reading, doing a lot of things that are more intellectually driven, / being as a person, being fairly sensitive in terms of being more, I don't know if in touch is the right word, but maybe it is, I don't know, more in touch with my emotions than the stereotypical man is. Which may be a good or a bad thing, depends on how you look at it. Is like, somebody once tell me, man, it's like I'm in a lesbian relationship with you.
Is that what your partner told you? Oh, bless her heart.
I think there's that stuff that's part of who I am. So I think it was attractive to me to do something that gives me a different side to my personality, a more assertive, more pragmatic, little bit more raw approach to things. So to me, it was interesting because you would provide something I was lacking. Like by nature, I was going a certain way. So to do something that doesn't go that way, that actually, basically the way I look at it is allowed to speak more than one language, in metaphorically speaking, meaning you grow, you are by experiencing things that are not already the stuff that you're inclined toward, but you grow, you are by sometimes doing things that are a bit different from what's coming natural to you.
Yeah, actually, I had reached out to Savannah I think that was like about a year ago, because I was like, how much that would probably help you to feel like confident and just, not necessarily like you can go and like wrestle a bear. I mean, I'm sure she could, but,
Sure.
but, just to feel like a sense of like power that you exude from within. Like I took, a course, it was a very brief course in Krav Maga before I went back to India in 2017. And that, like, I couldn't tell you what I remember from the actual course other than like, gouge eyeballs and rip throats if you have to, which was cool. But the one thing that really stuck with me was, if you're ever in a situation where someone is going to, pick a person as a target, the likelihood of them picking someone who is emitting a sort of tiger, like they will get caught or hurt, versus that like meek little mouse kind of energy and stuff. So like that actually really did help, along with my Kubaton that I bought in that course. That was fun going through the Delhi airport. They're like, excuse me, ma'am, what is this? And this is where I play dumb blonde. I don't know. It's a keychain. I'm like holding it up. They're like, but what is it for? I'm like, it's just a keychain. It's literally like this weapon. Yeah. But I mean, hey, for monkeys and, dogs and it's good. Okay, well, that's really cool. And then I guess that would be interesting to come into the story of, you had mentioned your great grandfather in a post on Instagram. I think you had screenshot it from like Facebook or something about, and you said that he looked like a pirate, but he was a part of World War I, the Arditi. Am I pronouncing that right? Yeah. I'm really curious as to a little bit more about that, because I don't think that we often hear much about World War I and World War II, other than sort of like the same old kind of, I guess like classic story of blah, blah, blah. I mean, I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, growing up, I didn't really know much about it. I was like, oh, he has been in war. I was like, I don't know what war, 1, 2, something, whatever. And of course, since he was a great grandfather, I only saw him so many times because there was a humongous gap in age, of course. So, but eventually what I found out is that, yeah, he had been in World War I in this one unit of the Italian army that was completely batshit crazy. Sort of their approach was very much one of their main weapons, which is insane when you think about a modern war, was using a dagger. So they would just, they were kind of famous. One of the boundaries between Italy and Austria that they were fighting with was there was this very large river. And one of the things that these guys were sort of like proto special forces were was to swim the river, try to use hand grenades to make their way toward the trenches, get into enemy trenches, and then stab everybody, which is a little bit of an up close and personal kind of warfare. And they had an insanely high casualty rates. They were notorious for being brave to the point of being just straight up insane. And that was kind of that particular unit of the Italian army. So it was a bit of a different one. I always had the image of like this World War I in particular, Italian army even more so, just kind of stuck in the trenches, very crappy life, all this shelling back and forth sort of. Now, there's nothing particularly fun about the going off and having knife fights on a regular, but at the same time, it's definitely a different feel compared to the standard version of World War I that I normally heard of.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I was going to say. It's really interesting. That's almost like kind of like kamikaze style, basically. Yeah. Well, and that's why I was curious. Cause like, I grew up, my grandfather, he drove the ambulance and went and picked up, injured or dead bodies in World War II. So I always heard, and, Canadian. So I always heard that version of the story and about, Hitler and all of that. So, but then, yeah, I don't know actually a whole lot about World War I. I know they taught us in school, but it was a long time ago. So then you have your grandmother who has this fantastic story of avenging her lover that was murdered by fascists. And that was really interesting because you posted this absolutely adorable, cutesy photo of her. Sure. And then you lead with this story. And I'm like, okay, this is a really interesting family background.
Yeah, that was definitely because, she was a teenager. I think she was 16 or something. Well, she must have been somewhere in there, 16, 17 back in. But she became a partisan in World War II, and it was a pretty dangerous job. Like in France, I don't know what the statistics are for Italy, but in France, the average lifespan of somebody who joined the resistance was about 6 months.
Oh,
the odds of getting caught and killed were insanely high.
Mhm.
Italy, I'm sure is not exactly the same, but probably not dramatically different either. So yeah, it was a very risky business. And especially one of the things that makes it trippy to me is that typically, you hear war stories, they're always you join the army, you go out there to fight in uniform somewhere out there. This instead for her was just an extension of daily life in the sense that there is no battlefield out there. It's like the city you live in is where everything is going down. You are down the street buying bread, and around the corner is where you may be doing some of the actions. So it's kind of like it's a different feel for it, and always made me wonder how does that change the PTSD component of it, because you're never removed from the place where all this stuff went down.
Mm.
Everything you do in your day-to-day life, it's yeah, right there. It's your city. It's where you go do everything outside your house. So I'm sure that had an impact on her, on a lot of people like that, where it's clearly changes the perspective a little bit.
Right. And so would she have had to have gone through some kind of like training for that, or was like I'm
Yeah,
curious
I
as to
mean,
how that works.
the primary thing that she was doing was, yeah, smuggling weapon. One thing that they did was, let's say that they decided to put a hit on maybe a fascist judge or a guard or somebody. Part of the job that she would do would be to carry the weapon to the shooter so that then the shooter would take a shot and then pass the weapon right back, because the idea was that if you are caught, like first everybody would be looking for the shooter. So if they find a shooter and the shooter has no weapon, that would improve the odds of getting away with it, because they're like, oh, maybe we got the wrong guy.
Okay.
Whereas the idea also was that because of kind of fascist gender roles, they had this idea that women were sort of not capable of violence. So they were much more, they didn't check them as much. So the odds that a young woman could get away carrying a weapon was much higher than some young guy.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. And like this is why I was like trying to connect some of the dots, because I know like they talk about it a lot. I say they, but it's like I know it's something they've been coming out more and more about, things that get passed down to us through our genes. And
Sure.
I've often wondered too, with my grandparents both growing up during World War II. um, like my grandmother's village was being bombed in England. And, I think my grandfather, he lied so he could, join
Sure.
the services. And I know for sure growing up too, like I think back to like my grandfather, um, people, in the family are like, oh, well, that's just granddad. I'm like, no, like that's PTSD. Like he
Yeah.
drank like a sailor to
Yeah.
cope. And we didn't know much about that kind of stuff back then. So then how much of that actually does affect us through, our genes and kind of, or even like what you're interested in. So that's interesting.
That would
Yeah.
be bad news because the history of humanity is so packed with trauma and horrible things happening that if it's passed down the genes, then everybody's horrendously messed up because there's nobody who has a clean, happy past.
Yeah. Basically, we're all fucked. We're doomed. Yeah, and yeah, I guess so. I feel like I've had that thought a few times. I'm like, if it all starts from this one place, then I imagine there's probably a whole lot. Too, there's like so many people that have this idea, and I'm not so sure I'm convinced that it's possible, like this idea or this concept of we can heal the world and like create a new one. And I'm like, I mean, I feel like there's a certain amount of that we can do in ourselves, but I don't know if that's possible to do on like a global level. I think that if we're going to talk on a spiritual level, like if this is a place where people are coming to work out their karmas, I think the best approach is just to work out your own internal stuff rather than trying to save the whole world.
I mean, also is like, how do what's your to-do list when you decide to save the whole world? How do you start? What's step one or step two or step three? To me, in some way, the two coincide because ultimately you can only affect what you can reach.
Mhm.
So I think step 1, 2, and 3 begins with you, with the people around you, with the people that you get in day-to-day contact with. That's where you have the greatest amount of power to make a positive difference. The
Mhm.
bigger the scale, the more the ripples of whatever action you take get smaller and smaller and less intense. So can you have an impact? Yeah, of course. But it's not separated from like the big impact you're going to have. The big ripples are going to be close to you. They're going to be where you drop the pebble, and immediately close by, they get large. The further remove you get, the less the impact. So I think like there's no real separation there, because you're going to do the stuff you need to do for yourself, for your family, for those close to you, for the people you run into, with the hope that maybe it has a bigger effect on a wider scale. But you can bank on that. There's no way to, there's no way to operate on that wide of a scale just by intention. I don't think it
Mm.
works that way. I think it works by some of it by chance, some of it through ripple effect. I don't think just you can set out and decide tomorrow I'm going to change the world. It's like, how exactly? How do you go about acting on a humongously large scale?
Yeah, and also I've kind of noticed over the last, like, I don't know, couple of years, in particular 18 months, there's a lot of tendency towards um eh, people trying to take on these really huge problems and think that they can, finger point and get really loud, and certain things obviously you do need to bring attention to, but there's a certain amount of, like, me noticing, I guess, within my own circle of people, the ones that get so diehard passionate about and emotional, which, being emotional when you're trying to make, or, make changes, is not, at least in my own experience, the best approach. And I found that of the people that have become so diehard about some of these, like, issues, are the ones that literally have the most difficulty managing their own internal state and world. And I'm like, okay, so in reflection of, like, my own self, and in times where I've been, like, oh, this is a cause, it's like, I feel like the best place is to look at yourself and, I don't know, do some self-reflecting on your own life and making an impact in, like, maybe your family or your immediate circle, versus trying to, like, take on the whole entire world, while you at the same time, can't get out of bed for 3 days at a time because you get into such a a state or whatever. And I've been there, so that's why I'm like, I've just noticed that as a pattern.
Well, and I think it's very pragmatic. It's like, okay, what is that you want to change? You want to solve the environmental problems on Earth. That's awesome. That's fantastic. We need it. It's like there's not even an option. It's like if we don't do it, we're screwed.
Mm.
How are you gonna go about it? What energy are you putting out there? What's the outcome? If you are just yelling on Facebook all day and all you do is get into fights with people and stuff, you are miserable and you haven't changed a thing. So clearly that's not working.
And
So
no one
okay,
wants to be around you either.
so let's look at the strategy again. How can you keep that goal in mind? What are things that you can do, whether they are big or whether they are small? What are things that you can do that go in that direction, that don't take all your energy, and at the same time may actually accomplish something? To me,
Mm.
it's a very pragmatic thing. You can be, it's not saying, no, you shouldn't be passionate about certain issue. Be passionate. Okay,
Mm.
now they are passionate. How are you going to make it happen?
Mm.
What's your energy output, and what are the results they are actually getting? And to me, that's kind of like the big question right there, is how does that work that way? It's like, it's purely pragmatic. If you can figure out that putting a lot of energy, you can make this humongous difference in the way the world is going, maybe it's worth it. Maybe you want to do it. But that is dependent on if you're getting the results. If you're
Mm.
not getting the results, then keep banging your head against the wall, screaming, this is important, is not going to help. That's not how you're making yourself miserable, and you're not achieving anything either. So it's like,
Mm.
okay, maybe we want to retweak it a little bit, that strategy.
Mm. Yeah, as you're like sharing that, I was kind of thinking of I don't know if you've heard of this. I had watched it on a program by Greg Braden. He was talking about the cycles of human conflict
Mhm.
and how history has shown that in times of like they've been able to track it, I guess, in relation and correspond it to the sun and the I guess like the flares that happen with the sun. And like he says, it's not that the sun is causing human conflict, but they can see that in times of, I guess, like when there's more of the solar flares and heat beating down on Earth, humans tend to go more towards these extremes and wars and human conflict. Have you heard about this?
Mhm.
Oh, it's interesting. Do you watch Gaia
Mhm.
ever? Okay. Anyways, I'll send you, if you're interested, I'll send it to you. But yeah, it was kind of an interesting thought because this was something that he was saying, and I watched it back in like I think 2016, and he was predicting that by 2022 that human conflict would escalate, and then over the last year it's like, oh, it's happening. So why do you think some people will, in times of extreme, let's say, will tip more towards like evil, or and then others will tip more towards the light? Because I think we all have that choice, and I know you were also talking about that on another post about like this crossroads that you can come to. Why do you think some people tip one way and then the other?
I think it's, one approach is very understandable. Is frustration, is fear, is anger, is all those emotions that usually manifest in lashing out, in wanting to sort of make somebody else pay for all the crap that you're feeling because maybe they deserve it. Maybe you see them as a cause of this, or maybe they just happen to be in the way and you're frustrated. But either way, it's kind of acting on that hurt, anger, fear, all those emotions. And, there's plenty of those to go around. So everybody deals with them and everybody can go that path. Then there's the other one that's like, look, life is miserable enough as it is. People are suffering enough as it is, unless you are the direct cause of my suffering in a big way because you're a complete evil asshole. Otherwise, why do I want to pass it on to somebody else? Why do I, strength is dealing with the crap that you have to deal with without passing them on to someone else. So why don't I just do that job and not make it happen? Of course, it's easier said than done. And I mean, without even going on a big good evil scale, look at like raising kids. Every parent who's sleep deprived, who's overstretched, who's doing too many things at once, who's trying to keep it together, sometime their kid will do something completely minor. They will spill milk, and that initial reaction, you'll feel like you're gonna lose. You feel like, God damn it, why could you do that? And then you're like, yeah, I'm yelling at 3-year-old because they spilled milk. He's like, what the fuck? That's not right. But you can sort of see the emotions going both ways, right? One is easy, is I'm mad, so I'm gonna yell and scream and make everybody else pay for it.
Mhm.
And the other one is like, I'm mad, I'm tired, but I'm gonna dig deep and find the resources to behave in a way that I would like to behave and treat people how I think it would be the right way to go. And I think at that point is, some of it is a choice. Some of it is just how much pressure you're in, because, some people will snap under very small pressure. Some people will snap if you put massive amounts of pressure, and even then they will only snap after a long while. Eventually, everybody's got a breaking point. It's not that, people, like, eventually if you pile up enough horror, somebody will snap. But the key, I guess, is to make yourself progressively stronger as a human being so that that breaking point is further and further away, and most events in day-to-day life are not going to take you there, or maybe ever.
Mm.
And then to me, that to me what a hero has been about, right? Is finding the way to deal with your own crap by yourself, or talking with people, but not in a way that you dish it out on somebody else, where you don't pass it along to somebody else.
Mm.
And I think kind of that's what a lot of stuff boils down to.
Mm. Yeah, it's kind of almost like contagious.
Oh
Like
yeah.
that negativity, you pass it along. Yeah, and I was thinking, okay, if we were gonna refer to someone who's like gone over to the dark side, and this is just sort of my own curiosity, because I'm just assuming, Danielle, you know everything completely, so I'm just
Everything
gonna
about
ask you.
uh, that's-
I sometimes do that. I just assume my guests know everything, but it's like good to ask questions about what people think on these topics. And, in regard to like dark side and evil, if someone were to go like full Darth Vader, um, like, do you believe that evil people know that they're evil? Like, Hitler, for an example, I think like he thought he was doing good. I don't know. And like, so we're talking like psychopaths, sociopaths, like people who are murderers and rapists and like just there's no light in there anymore, or maybe there never was because they were born with something
sure.
missing. Do you think that those people believe that they're good and virtuous?
Many do, some don't. And
Mm.
this you can see in just the way people answer. I mean, there are some people who very openly, I was reading something about some serial killer from the early 1900s, very open about being yep, I am evil. That's what I do. This is who I am. And so in that case, there is an awareness and there's also a, yeah, so what? Um, there are others who, of course, justify themselves. They can do the most atrocious things ever, and they tend to always justify themselves. And I think that's probably the majority of those cases. I think more people tend to spin it, always find a justification to justify themselves and say you're the good guy at the end.
Mm.
A few will have the at least awareness slash honesty to recognize that they are not. Of course, they don't have what it takes to actually change. They'll just be like, yep, that's how it is. Tough luck. But I think both are real, just because, I mean, there seems to be plenty of evidence to point to the existence of both sides.
Hmm. Yeah, I bet you've also read a lot about these different types of characters, especially with, history on fire. And um, I know you had said in a reference to like one of your posts that the job of a storyteller is to stare into the darkness, to confront the ugliest forces of the human soul, and then find a way to shine a light, reminding us of all that is beautiful and heroic within us. And I liked that a lot because I feel like if you're starting to sometimes going over history and some of like the darkness around that can be quite depressing.
Oh, yeah.
And so, like, just curious as to how you're able to do that and examine it and obviously share it in like quite an entertaining way. um but then also not become entrenched in the doom of it all. Like you're still able to find that light.
Yeah. I think it's important because it's otherwise you shoot yourself, right? Otherwise, is you can make a very good argument for why you should shoot yourself. It's like, oh, there's life is terrible. There are all these terrible things that happen. There's very little hope to change on a mass scale. There's these issues in personal life. There's this, there's that. You can come up with 10,000 good reasons why life sucks. And so, what's the point of continuing?
Mm.
Um, and I don't disagree with that analysis. I think there are 10,000 things out there why life sucks. At the same time, there are also some beautiful, fantastic things. And to me, since those are the cards you are given, finding a way to maximize the beauty and sweetness of it all and be able to deal with the heavy crap is what living is to a large degree, is what the skill of living is. Because there are always going to be reasons why you can see things in a really dark, depressing way. Like, I'm not saying it like, oh, no, really, like, I can perfectly understand why anybody would be depressed, both in their own personal life or when looking at the world as a whole. But once we have established that it's real, that is not something you're making up, that is not because you're weak, that is not because any of that, because there are very good objective reasons to feel that way, then can we find a way to move past it, to acknowledge that there's a lot of pain out there and in your own life, and yet find a way to enjoy things, find a way to be good to other people, find a way to be sweet despite all the shit you have been through. That to me is heroism. That to me is what really separates somebody that I consider an amazing human being and people who I feel like you're kind of a victim of your own circumstances and you didn't find a way out. That to me is that's why to me evil, I mean, I think evil, there is some evil that's like almost the stereotypical absolute total evil, but the majority of cases are not. And I think most time evil is weakness, is not being able to rise above all these forces that are pulling you down and then dish it out on everybody else because you're too hurt and frustrated to have the guts to act otherwise. And so it's understandable. It's still not okay, and it's still to be cracked down upon because of the consequences. But I get where it comes from. You know, it's like you didn't wake up one day and said, "I just want to be a horrible human being." You're just a bundle of frustration who's acting on that frustration all the time. Or maybe you're trying and you're making 2 good steps and you're like, good job, I feel like I'm a nice human being, and somebody does something terrible to you and now you're frustrated again and you snap because it's like, I'm trying, you know, it's like kind of like somebody who's on a tightrope and then somebody arrive and push you. It's like, of course you got this, come on, I was trying so well. And it's like, well, yeah, but that doesn't, you're right, you have reasons, but that doesn't change it.
I like that though. I actually really like that. It is having the courage to make changes and to not be a victim of your life circumstances. It's interesting because you'll think of I'll use, chronic pain as an example because it's something that I suffer from. And, there's other people that I've met who have suffered from, similar kind of things. And you'll have people that are so miserable and it's like, I get it. Chronic pain is a bitch. It is not fun. And like, I know when I need to surrender to it and not quarantine myself, not go and be around other people other than my poor partner who, bless his soul, has given me so much love and compassion when I need it. It reminds me that all is not lost. But then, I always make sure I cap it. I like to not let the grief or those overwhelming feelings last. It's, you got to put a cap on those things so that you don't let that become your habitual way of being and thinking. Because, yeah, okay, we all suffer. And I think that was probably one of the best things that I came to over the last couple of years is we all have shit. We don't get to walk through life unscathed. We all have something at some point. And so what am I going to do? Am I going to be, unhappy and miserable and stop doing everything? It's like, no, I'm going to do stuff, even though it hurts, and deal with the pain and continue to, hopefully try to like heal my body or, continue on with my life. And like, I know, like, I'm curious for you, like from your own experience, because I know a bit about your background and stuff with losing your wife. Like that would have been very difficult. And so I'm curious as to like what, from your own experience, what the best advice you would give someone in regard to, and this is quoting you, enjoying each day in regard to defiantly enjoying each day despite of your life's, heartache and experience.
Yeah, because I think you can't really separate the two. Like if you're waiting to be happy when things are good, good luck, because that's probably not going to happen, or if it's very fleeting if it happens. And so to me, that ability to find something to enjoy, even in dark circumstances, to find something that they are maybe moments, they are maybe brief interaction, whatever that may be, kind of seize on it, focus on it, that it reminds you that there's something good in life, and then extend it to other people. Then try to, maybe you're tired, maybe you're cranky, but you find a way to remind yourself, okay, that doesn't mean that this next person deserves my crankiness. I'm going to try to find maybe 45 seconds of energy to switch it tiny bit, just enough so that I can be nice to them, just that I can smile at them, say something that put them in a better mood. And if I can do that, and if I can build a muscle of doing that more and more often, then suddenly the moments in life, those kind of brief fleeting moments that may be fantastic, maybe they increase a little bit. Maybe they're, rather than being 1% of the time, they are 8% of the time. And the ones that are pretty good go from being 15% to 25. Yeah, I'm making up the numbers, but you know what I mean. It's like if you can start extending that breathing room, right? You can start extending a little bit those spaces where you are not necessarily comfortable and everything is great, but you are, it's like, oh, I can work with this. This is enough for me to work with. And the more you get comfortable doing it, the more you can work under more pressure and be even nicer to people. Like, to me, really, like the quality that I admire the most in anybody, like, I don't give a fuck about people IQ. I don't care about how many books people have read. I mean, that's fun and all. It's cool if we want to chat about certain things and it helps. But like, to me, really, kindness is the quality that I appreciate the most, because it takes a lot of guts to be kind in a world that often is not that kind, both on a personal level and on an existential level. So to me, kindness is an act of heroism, of daily heroism, that if you find a way to smile and make other people smile, what more can you ask of a human being? You're doing something fantastic. If you make people feel loved in one way or another, you make them feel appreciated in one way or another, you do something for other people who are clearly struggling just as much as you are, if not more sometimes. That's as good as it ever gets. That's, to me, is the maximum that a human being can aspire to in terms of being a force for good.
Mm. Yeah, I was always amazed by that when I traveled and spent time in India. Like, I've probably spent about 10 months or more, 10 or 11 months of my life in total through my 3 trips in India. And just at the, and I think this is why I love it, had such a huge impact on me and I loved it so much, was because people will have a little hut on the side of the road. They're cooking over a fire and they all sleep in one room and on the floor, like, and they'll invite you in and feed you and
Sure.
give you a chai, and they want to sit with you, they want to talk with you, and they smile there. And like, life there, I can see, like, the hardship that most people, with 40% of the population being below, the poverty line, but yet they extend so much kindness to others and one another, and they smile. And it's just that, to me, and singing, like rejoicing and praying. And yeah, I think that was what really stood out to me the most, being there. And that had such a huge impact, because I think until I was about I went when I was 22, and I'd been to Thailand previous to that and traveled a little bit, but I had always kind of felt like, is this life? The way I grew up, is this it? And then after having this experience of, oh, wait, that's just how I've experienced it. It doesn't have to be like that. And I don't have to be like that. And that just made such a huge impact. And I'm glad I did that instead of going to university. I think I needed that,
Yeah.
So, um, and then I actually, I was going to say there was another quote of yours that I wanted to come back to as well. And this is kind of coming into, and I'm trying to be mindful of time here, so I'm like asking as many questions as I can here, but accountability and responsibility, because something you had written was, all it takes is one mistake, one lapse in our ability to ride the waves, and before you know it, we start making excuses for our mistakes until those mistakes become who we are. So from a historical understanding of humanity, do you feel that folks have more difficulty accepting responsibility today than in the past? Or do you think that this is something that has always been like that?
I think it's a human thing. Nobody likes to feel bad. Look at it and say, "Oh, I screwed up. I'm didn't live up to my ideal of who I want to be. I didn't live up to their ideal of how I want to be. So I'm just going to pretend it didn't happen because it feels better that way. Otherwise, it messes with my self image. It's kind of natural, because of course it's not a solution, because by just hiding it, you're not making it really go away. You're actually just not addressing the problem. So you're more likely to do it again because you haven't really learned from it. You haven't figured out why you're doing it and what you can do about avoiding it. So that's kind of becomes the problem. I mean, I've had a lot of times, particularly when my daughter was little, when suddenly frustration kick in, and then I look at how I'm acting, or the tone of voice I'm taking, or everything, and I'm just like, man, you are so far from where you thought you were in terms of your ability. Like, I have all this great idea of how I want to be, how I am, my self-image, and then there are moments where I'm like, oh, that was not pretty. That sucks. That's who you are. Now, of course, you can start beating up yourself and just feeling like crap, or you can say, yeah, that was shitty. Let me try again. And actually, because I hate it so much and I don't want to be this person this bad, next time I feel that frustration, hopefully I've built enough muscle and hatred for turning into that person that I'm never going there again. Or never is a big word, but I'm going to limit it. I'm not going to be the one who's just suddenly yelling at a 4-year-old, because it's like, I mean, and it may be minor things, and we all do. Like, there's not a parent on earth who's gonna go through raising a kid and not lose their patience sometime. But of course, is degrees. It depends of where you're at. It may be to somebody else, maybe minor, but then you look at it, and I'm like, am I really freaking out my child by getting all angry about something where because I can't control my own shit, because I'm giving into frustration, because I'm giving, I suck. Now, having said that, it's like I suck is like, okay, well, good reasons to, because you feel that way, good motivation to do better next time,
Mm.
and catch yourself earlier and know that that's where it's going. You see the sign, you do whatever you need to do to snap that cycle so you don't go past the point where you're unpleasant or you are, and it's hard. And we do it in relationships, we
Mm.
do it in anybody who's close to you, who's gonna see you in your good moments, in your bad moments. And those are clearly the people that you least of all want to pass on your crap to, because they are the people you love the most.
Mhm.
So even more so, you want to work 10 times as hard not to do that. Which doesn't mean repress your emotion, but it may be just express them in a way that's not so destructive, not so angry, not so all of that. So that's totally fine. I mean, I don't believe in pretending things are all right. Like, even with a kid, I don't at all advise to just stuff down your emotion and pretend everything is all right when it's not.
Mm.
I think it's totally good, and even raises more mature human being to share with them when you struggle, when you have a hard time, why you're sad, why you're frustrated, why you're getting angry. But also showing now, okay, that's not a dead sentence. There are ways around it. There's stuff we can do about those feelings. And maybe I'll need your help with it. Maybe I'm struggling here. I could go either way. I need some help to push me over the hump in a good way.
Mm.
And I think keeping it real, but at the same time not indulging into crappy emotions, I think that's important.
Mm. Yeah, and I imagine that martial arts would be like a really good release for that too. I know for me, sometimes it's going to the gym, and it's been like that for a number of years where I'm like, okay, I can feel this stuff coming up. I need to deal with how I'm feeling, and then like the almost like the intensity will come down, and then I can like better communicate how I'm feeling rather than being so emotional. But um kind of evaluating yourself in a way. Actually, I read a book on anger by Seneca. I guess this was maybe 6 months ago or something. And something that he said is, and granted, I'm not in agreement of everything Seneca had to say, but one of the things was about at the end of the day, you should always evaluate yourself. Where did you do good, but then also where could you have done better? And I think, like, for myself, I have a tendency towards beating myself up. And I think a lot of people do. But being intensely self-critical, it almost kind of just like it doesn't give you the opportunity to learn and grow because you're just hammering yourself instead of being like, ooh, okay. I'll use this as an example. You didn't notice it, but I was like, with that, I don't know why I got so like embarrassed about that tweet, whereas like I had a great time with Daniele Bolelli on my podcast. And I was like, wait, I can't edit this. It was so silly. But for me, it felt so cringeworthy. And then I was like, why am I so like, this is so silly to beat myself up over something so tiny, and like to do that in all kinds of other ways where, yeah, maybe something came out of you, and you had a moment and it was, like you said, cringeworthy. You look at yourself, you're like, ooh, that's not so nice. But you can't really grow or change from that place of like self, shaming. You almost just have to look at it from okay, that sucked. I don't want to be that person.
Yep.
So what am I going to do to change that versus either becoming like that and allowing myself to indulge in these toxic, emotions or my perspective and state of mind versus, using it as an opportunity. And, just to come to, I had something happen last week. It was probably one of the more twisted things that I've ever experienced from others. And I had been fortunate enough to have a podcast with somebody the week before that was saying about like everything that happens to us is for our higher learning. And so I just was like, for 3 days while I was dealing with it, I was like, this is good for me. Okay, I'm stressed, but this is good for me. I can't see it right now, but this is good for me. And so because I did that, I was able to deal with all of the facts and keep my emotions out of it despite, and like sort of contain my stress. And then once it was all dealt with, I was like, okay, I may have stress puked after it was all done because my body was like, I got to get this stress out of me.
Yeah.
But I felt really good about knowing that in the past, I might have been like, well, and like feed the drama. Whereas I'm like, no, this is, rather than me feeding that and saying this is a bad thing, I'm looking at it as this is a good thing. I'll deal with the shit that I have to around it. And then I'm on to better things. And here we go.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's both the refusing to look at your mistake and pretending you're doing everything great even when you're not, just as much as the beating yourself up over a mistake. Ultimately, they are both completely defeatist strategies because they are not moving on either way.
Mm-hmm.
Either because you are way too harsh on yourself, which is like, well, great, how's that helping to be a better person? Or because you're not taking responsibility, which also doesn't. So to me, it's like, look, what's done is done. Is there anything you can learn from it so that you can be better the next time around? Because it's useless to dwell on the past, but it's useful to learn from the past. So it's kind of like, okay, what can I take from this so that this is over? There's nothing I can do about a minute ago. What I can do about is who I'm gonna be a minute from now. So anything I can take from it, I'm not if you believe that you're a terrible, horrible person, and then what are you doing? Just why are you even trying, kind of thing, you know? But at the same time, learn from your mistakes and move on. I think it's really important, that thing of just take what you need, move to the next step, and do that. And so many of our emotions kind of stand in the way of that. They trap you into the previous moment, or you go forward through denial. Those are not good strategies because they don't lead to a good change down the road.
Yeah. And I know for like this situation with me, that was one of the things that I did. I'm like, okay, I'm looking at this as how I can do it better next time. And what could I have done better in this situation? And where's my part versus, this, I think for so long, I always wanted to, I got to do better. I got to do better. And it was coming from a place of determination and motivation. But at the same time, when you're putting so much pressure on yourself to always do better, you're almost just like, it's like 1 foot on the gas, 1 foot on the brake. You're like coming up against yourself all the time.
Yeah. And it's the same thing as with raising kids, right? It's like some people, they are either overindulgent and let them get away with bullshit that they shouldn't and pretend that never happened because they are your perfect kids,
Mhm.
or they are way too hard and they are constantly like, yeah, okay, that was nice, but why don't you? And it's like, you can't do either one, is going to fuck them up. Because in
Mhm.
one case, you spoil them in a way that doesn't allow them to learn and grow up. In
Mhm.
another case, you're way too hard and they are going to be constantly on their own ass and critical and not patting themselves on the back enough, not loving themselves enough because you
Mhm.
always got to be better. It's like, yeah, sure, but let's relax a little. You're good. Let's start with that. You're doing good.
Mhm.
You have done good things. You made some mistakes. Who cares? Let's move on. You are good. Let's just work on being better. That's all. And it seems so easy. It's like, well, of course, you don't want to go to one extreme, you don't want to go to the other. There's a happy way to keep it all together, but it's way easier said than done, of course. And I
Mhm.
mean, think about how weird that is. Like, pretty much all parents who are not complete sociopaths love their kids. And yet, most people grow up with some issues of different severity deriving from the way their parents raised them.
Mhm.
And it's not because they don't want to be good to their kids, but because they screw up in the process. They fall off balance. They pass some of their own blind spot and all of that. So to me,
Mhm.
really, that's like where one of the greatest things that you can do for yourself, for the world, for everything is like really learn more about who you are, learn more about your blind spots, learn how to communicate better, learn how to show a ton of love to the people who are around you, like a ton of love through 10,000 daily gestures, while at the same time helping them to improve themselves.
Mhm.
And those are not in contradiction. You don't have to be one or the other, or, oh, they know I love them, I'm pushing them for their own good. It's like, no, no, no. You really need to let them feel good about themselves while you're also pushing them. And most people, I think, because it's easy to fall into almost like a dogmatic response where it's one way or the other. That tends to be, unfortunately, the human mind seems to crave binary logic where we go one path or the other, whereas most things are both at the same time in a delicate balance.
Mhm.
Again, very easy thing to say, hard to pull off in reality. But what else is there to do?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That actually makes a lot of sense. And I think for, so many of us, like if you get too much criticism, and not enough praise or encouragement growing up, you internalize that you're not good.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, I haven't been a parent, so I don't know how difficult and like what that would be like. But I mean, from just different conversations I've had with others, I know that that is something that if you get too much criticism, you're like, well, fuck it. Why do anything? Why bother? And you can tend towards more of that self destruction and, why bother?
Yeah, one time I did this thing with my daughter. She was in like in kindergarten or something, and she was used to always doing things well, being praised for it, and all of that. And one day, our teacher got mad at her because she kept talking with her friends during class.
Mhm.
And she clearly, I could see in her personality was not the one who makes justification, is the one who beat herself up, right? It was like,
Mm.
I'm not good doing good enough. And so I kept telling her, look, I don't care, it's fine, it's not a big deal. And it wasn't clicking, right? I still could see that it was. So I was like, you know what? Let me make a point. Let me try to drive home the point that I'm really telling you that this was not a big mess up of any kind. You know what we do because you got busted talking with your kids in class? We're going to go to the store and I'm going to buy you some toys. And she's like, because my teacher got mad at me? He's like, yeah, because your teacher got mad at you. Because the point here that I want you to get is that you are great. You as a person, you deserve every good thing that comes your way. The only thing you need to do is change a tiny thing. Don't talk while the teacher is talking. Pretty easy to do, right? That has nothing to do with you being a good person or deserving good things. And so to her was like, oh, okay. So all I got to
Oh.
do is not talk while the teacher is talking. Yeah, that's it. That's it. You are awesome before, you're awesome after. Just change that one tiny thing. Easy, right?
Mm.
And I think it's important. Now, if your kid is one who's they make all sort of justification for themselves and try not to look at, maybe you need to push a little harder on, you need to tweak it a little where you are sort of rewarding them less and patting them less on the back and kind of make them look at the hard stuff a little more. So it depends from one person to the next. But I think there's a sweet spot there where you can slightly tweak it, but the message remains the same. Is we're not telling you you're a bad person or there's anything wrong with you. You're fantastic, you're loved, you're this, you're that. You just need to tweak a few things here and there, make everybody else around you happier, and you can have a good life.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great example. That's also super sweet. Because yeah, I think that in certain situations, especially if like you are a kid and you experience, humiliation, it's, you get yelled at and it's embarrassing, you might, perceive it. And so like that's solid, because that, like, it's interesting, these little moments that we experience when we're young, those are the moments that can actually completely change like things long term.
Yep.
And then like you said, on the flip side of that, I remember being at the park a few months ago now. And there was a little boy who had been like screaming and yelling. He was probably about 4. He's like yelling and screaming at his mom. And she's like, "Mommy's hungry. I need to go get something to eat." And I happened to be over at the little coffee truck and walked past them. So then they come over there and she's trying to order food. And he's like having a full-on tantrum, and he's picking up the orange cones. He's like, ah, just like ripping them up, like throwing them everywhere. And then the mom's going, "Oh, please stop doing that, Mommy. You want an ice cream? Do you want it? Do you want an ice cream, sweetheart? Okay." And the kid just continues terrorizing. And then she goes over, gives him an ice cream, and cleans up. And I'm just like, I don't want to be judgmental because I'm not a parent. I don't have a kid. But you know what I'd probably be saying? We're going home. Pick that up. We're going home, because this is not how we behave in public. And I've seen that a few times. We're in a
No, and you're absolutely right. There is the opposite stuff.
oh yeah.
It's so soft that you screw things up. That's why it's a judgment call, and it's a hard one, because it's easy to follow a dogma. It's like, you should always be a hard ass on your kids, or you should always cuddle them. It's like, it's neither. You need to know exactly what the appropriate one is in each occasion, which obviously is changing all the time. That's
Yeah. Well, and that's the exact thing. Like, I think for so many of us growing up over, I don't know, especially like us 90s kids getting our asses whooped and stuff like that, and spanked, and everyone's so, now about like, you can't punish your kids at all. But something that really, I actually love that Jordan Peterson says, you got to make your kids somebody that other people are going to like, because you might love and like your kid, but if they're doing things that are annoying and like not nice, the rest of the world doesn't have to care about them. So, and the punishment that you can meter out is much less severe than the harshness of the world when they don't care.
Well, and one of the things to me is like, one of the problems that when most parents, when they kind of come down hard on their kids, they do it with a degree of emotion that's completely counterproductive to the goal here. Like in many cases, it's more like, look, I'm not making the rules here. You're just reaping your own. You're just reaping what you just planted right there. Because at the end of the day, to me, it's like, I don't know. I remember like one time my daughter, kind of without care, she broke something of mine. And I was like, hey. And she didn't want to deal with the fact that she did something wrong. So she was like, it's not a big deal. And I'm like, it kind of is. Because how do you like if I, maybe she had some silly crap, like she gathered some leaves that she wanted to keep, right? And I'm like, how do you like if I break those? Kind of trying to make the point of like, hey, have some empathy for where somebody else is coming from. And again, she didn't want to deal with it. So she's like, I don't care. I'm like, you don't. Okay. So
challenge accepted.
I can break this leaf, right? You don't care, because so it's fine. And so it's like, okay, well, let's toss it. Let's go. And then like 10 seconds later, she's like, no, I care. I'm like, okay, then. So I'm not punish you in the sense that I'm breaking your shit because you broke mine. I'm just trying to show you something. The moment you see it, it's done. It's over. I don't need to go further. But the moment you're denying my feelings that you just stepped on, well, then we got a problem. So let's keep working on it until you. But it's so weird because there's such a difference doing it with you have been bad, whack, versus doing it in a way that is like, look, just trying to show you where the effect of your actions. That's all. If you get it, it's done. There is no punishment. It's like, I don't want to punish you. I want you to understand something. If you need to understand it in a way that's harder for you, that's really you are running the show, not me.
Yeah, creating understanding and some discipline rather than punishment. Yeah, I like that. Well, I know we've kind of hit our hour here already, so I want to be mindful of that. And
cool. So I'm actually packing because these last few days, actually the last few weeks have been crazy. I'm always doing 10,000 things. So I was like, I'm gonna pack a few podcasts where I just I'm gonna pack them in the same few days. So like between yesterday, today, and tomorrow, I'm doing 7 podcasts. So it's like one after another, I'm just like, okay, ready to go. Next.
Go Bolelli, go Bolelli. Yeah, I saw actually the day that I had emailed you, I saw that you were on Aubrey's podcast. I was like, what do you know? He actually had his wife Vailana on, I think that was a couple episodes ago.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, they're great. Cool. Well, where can people find you?
The gods of Google are good. So if you manage to deal with how many L's are in my name, which there's a lot of those. So my last name is Bolelli, Bolelli. First name is Daniele, which is Daniel with an E at the end. And then you can find, books, History on Fire podcast, Drunken Taoist podcast, all the other good stuff.
Awesome. I like that. The gods of Google. I always call it Uncle Google, but I'm enjoying that. The gods of Google. Well, thank you so much for your time. And it was a pleasure. I really enjoyed this conversation. You're welcome back anytime when you're going through your podcast splurge.
I think I'll do it. It actually works for me. I've enjoyed I'll do 2 or 3 days where I'm just podcasting nonstop, and then I can focus on other stuff the rest of the time. It's the first time I do it. I'm like, it kind of works.
Well, there you go. The people want to hear what you have to say. So
this is a good balance. I like it.
Oh, good. Right on. Okay. Well, I hope you have a wonderful day, and thanks again.
Thanks so much. You too. Have a great one.